Hello, everyone. This is Sergio Marrero with RBL1 Live. Today we have a special guest, Rodney Sampson. He is an Atlanta native, also CEO of OHUB, Opportunity Hub, and he's been an ecosystem builder working with entrepreneurs in the region and at large at elevating those underrepresented entrepreneurs. So thank you for joining us today, Rodney.
It's good to be here, Sergio. Hope you're safe, sound, and sane as possible.
Yes, staying busy. But no, I'm glad to have you today. We've engaged in conversations before, and I know Rodney shares his deep perspective of ecosystem building, especially advocating for the Black community and communities of color at large. But I wanted to start off. Can you share a little bit more about Opportunity Hub?
Sure. First and foremost, it's a pleasure to be able to be here with you today. And I greet all of you with light and love wherever you are in the world, and those of you in America, particularly my Black brothers and sisters. Just want to say these are unprecedented times, but the difficult we do immediately, the impossible usually takes us but a second longer. So with that. We launched Opportunity Hub in 2013, initially as a place-based strategy. We started with physical campuses, tech hubs, co-working spaces. We were the first and largest Black-owned multi-campus space in really the world. We grew to 3 campuses very fast. And we quickly realized that although we were seeing about 15,000 people through all types of events, coming through the hub, and then of course those working there as well, that programmatically there were some skills gaps in terms of folks who said, "Oh, I'm interested in becoming a tech founder or starting a company or investing in a company." And so we literally just started stacking different programs, and a few of those programs ended up expanding nationally, like our coding school initiative, which has now trained over 300 people as early software engineers. Just last week, we launched a virtual version of that in partnership with Morehouse College here in Atlanta. It's the first coding certificate program at an HBCU. And so we're looking definitely at scaling that to the point that we're training tens of thousands of people, because we've got to get more skilled talent that's obsessively able to build products to the problems they want to solve. Another national program that a lot of people may know us for is OHUB's HBCU at South by Southwest. That program was going into its 5th year this year. We were prepared to take 500 students, Sergio, from colleges around the country for 5 days and 4 nights, all expenses paid, to South by Southwest so that they could connect with tech recruiters specifically for internships. And we were able to pivot that to a virtual experience, and that worked out very, very well. And then the third thing, of course, our OHUB Cities model. Shout out to the folks at OHUB KC. We graduated another cohort of founders, and they all received investments of $50,000 each. You met a lot of them there, Sergio. 2 of them have gone on. One just got in Techstars Kansas City, and the other one just finished Techstars Atlanta. So we're really excited about that work that we do there. And we really have been growing this ecosystem and community, also around the policy work we do, the ecosystem building work we do as well. It's really a comprehensive model across 3 different entities: the OHUB for-profit, our foundation, and then our investment vehicles as well. So that hopefully that gives you some starting context of Opportunity Hub.
Absolutely. Can you speak a little bit to, so I, been to one of your events, was gracious enough to be invited, and, stimulating the entrepreneurial ecosystem outside of, the New York, San Francisco areas, which is needed and great. It's already and really creating those cross connections to and especially for communities of color in the region. Can you share more about how did you end up starting Opportunity Hub?
Absolutely. So contextually, I go back 20 years. It was interesting. I was sent the one of the earlier versions of Harlem Capital's 2019 diversity report on venture-backed founders who had raised over $1 million. And I usually look at these lists and I'm like, I probably won't make it, and it's cool. And I looked at it, it's like, oh, I actually made the list. And I was a co-founder of a tech company back in 2000. Back then, it was three of us: Omar Wasso at Black Planet, Clarence Wooten. You might know him. He's hangs out in the Valley. He lives out there. And then myself in Atlanta and Multicast Media Networks and StreamingFaith.com. We were the first to live stream niche content producers over the internet. We actually had raised over $4 million, and that company was acquired by Kit Digital in 2010. And so, 20 years ago, to date, there literally have not been 200 Black and brown founders, not even one a month, Sergio, that have raised over $1 million in venture capital compared to the 25 to maybe 30,000 last year alone that received, capital here in America. And so I like to tell that story. And we all had a mentor from afar by the name of Emmett McHenry, who was the original founder of Network Solutions. And I encourage you to go learn more about how Emmett was a successful business owner, government contractor, service-based business in DC. And he was the only company to bid on this federal contract and manage the licensing and sale of all domain names on behalf of the United States government. He won the contract. He was the only one to bid on it, but he won it. And now he had to become a product-based company. And he had to raise $3 million. And he went to a lot of HBCUs, Black churches, media publications that are near and dear to us, conference influencers. Folks told him no. $50,000 checks. They didn't know what a domain name was because nobody had websites. So he didn't raise, and he ended up getting a term sheet for $5 million for the majority of the company. He took it. A few years later, Network Solutions was acquired for tens of billions of dollars. And I tell that because we talk a lot about how venture capital or angel investing can create multi-generational wealth, but what escapes us as a community is how to build scale in terms of being able to invest in those respective companies. And so in 2013, had a new book that came out, Kingonomics, 12 Innovative Currencies for Transforming Your Business and Life, inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And that really took off. And we did a lot of customer discovery and surveying at the conferences and events. And OHUB was born out of Black folks saying, we need a safe space to build without bias. I can tell you stories, even owning co-working spaces and visiting my colleagues around the country, only to be treated like an outsider by the folks at the front desk, and so we just really responded to the customer discovery that we didn't even intentionally do. We were just asking, I guess, the right questions and stumbled upon the model of OHUB. So we started off as Place, we added programming, and now we're looking at how to platform it for scale.
Got it. And really, I spoke to some of your entrepreneurs. It's like taking them from sometimes the beginning, the beginnings of the ecosystem, and then really connecting them. So it's great work. Can you share a little bit more what's been for you? Do you all can you talk a little bit about your work on the investment side as well?
Absolutely. So I started investing over 10 years ago, and it was sort of serendipitous. I was involved in another startup called eFactor. It was one of the first social networks for Entrepreneurs, originally founded out of the Netherlands. And I was invited to come on as a founding partner for North America. And man, I remember going to San Francisco and to the Valley and visiting LinkedIn when they were still in like 10,000 square feet of space. And you would walk into offices, and we were actually having a meeting to see if we could just use their API for people to sign. So like there wasn't an API back then. You had to like get on the phone with somebody and actually ask them, could you use them? And so it was interesting. That particular startup had offices in downtown SF in the James Flood building. And so I would frequent San Francisco back in the days, and you literally would just start hearing about deal flows and small funds. And I had been an operator, but not so much of an investor. And so that's how I really cut my teeth on investing in funds and investing in startups as well.
And we had talked about 100 Black Angels and that initiative. Can you share more about the group and the work you all are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a formalized fund. It really was an idea that Black Enterprise, they came to me, I want to say in 2014. I think the article was out there. They said, Rodney, are there 100 Black, active angel investors in America? And I started like writing posts. I got to like 20. And the question was like, I guess there might be, but they're not identifiable. And, I'm very skeptical of like these lists and the data that comes out. I sometimes hope that they're more than what we know of. Like even with Harlan Capital's report, they found 200. I hope there's another 200 that just we don't know about, And so anyway, that was sort of the brand and how we got started around the idea. And we first started doing these syndicates where we would put 5 or 10 Black investors together that had never invested in this alternative class across funds, founders, or what I call families, ecosystem building companies. And this was all new to them. The concept of an investor questionnaire, the concept of a prospectus, the concept of diligence, and just the thesis for investing. This was all foreign to most of the folks. And these were some pretty sophisticated subject matter experts in their respective fields of business or industry, from specialist physicians to lawyers to real estate developers to large, small businesses. It was a subset of people, professional athletes as well. And so we started forming a syndicate, almost like a small feeder fund. And we would basically go negotiate positions in funds as a syndicate. So we did that about 4 times. And then I said, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and, put the cash up to get the docs done. And that's how 100 Black Angels Fund 1 was born. We decided this week to change it to 100 Black Angels and Allies, hint, right?
There you go.
But we've already made an active investment in Mac Ventures.
That's awesome.
Really love and believe, what Marlon is doing and his partners. And so we're actively raising, actively investing, man. We invested in solo funds, kind of split that between OHUB and 100 Black Angels. So we're actively raising across 3 areas. I tell folks, like, if folks are intrigued about the Black tech ecosystem. And so folks are like, well, I want to invest in this founder. I've never done it before. I want to invest in this fund. I don't have enough money for minimums, or I believe in the programs. And it's like, well, you can invest in all 3 through, Opportunity Hub's 100 Black Angels Fund.
And can you share a little bit more about the Atlanta ecosystem that you're a part of? I know I went down there, was really like, I had spent most of my time, in San Francisco and New York, was excited to be there. Also with Georgia Tech there, some of the technology coming out of there. Can you share more about the types of startups you're seeing and the change that you've seen over the last few years?
Yeah, I think about, man, when I go back 20 years ago, being like that first guy in the Southeast, just, I could have been moving around, man, San Francisco back in the day, doing Black founder sightings and not finding one. So to see it develop, the Atlanta ecosystem really started taking off from a startup perspective, a venture-backed high-growth startup perspective. I want to say in and around 2010, and really started getting traction in 2012, 2013. I think we saw a really good run up until, I want to say, about 2017. I'm constantly self-reflecting and looking at the work and just the work that was done on the policy side. I remember going around Atlanta to different organizations, waving my honorarium to speak, wearing my OHUB t-shirt, because people thought startups was cute. They were like, oh, that's so nice.
Yep.
When you're done with that, are you going to get a real job? And, I wanted to bring some dignity to the startup world, because even outside of the Valley and New York and Boston and Seattle, the concept of startups, as a viable way to generate income for yourself and your employees, most people don't hear about these companies until they go public, right? Mm-hmm. The average person doesn't learn about, think about all the people who didn't even know what WeWork was until they were talking about going public. So like millions of square feet of space, and folks just didn't know what it was. So it's like the startup culture has been stealth in America and around the world. And now you're starting to hear more about it because of the future of work, the fourth industrial revolution, and the reality that 60+% of net new permanent jobs are coming out of these edge technology startups. So, we've been fortunate enough in Atlanta from a density perspective. At one point, I'd gone back and did the math, starting from 2000 all the way up until 2020. I did the math for the Atlanta Journal and Constitution back at the top of the year, when they finally gave us a cover story on the ecosystem on the front page of the AJC. And that, hundreds of millions of dollars have been raised. There are a couple outlier founders that have raised over 100 million for their respective startups. And so I think we've had that density. And I think that's one of the things that, because of the early work of Atlanta being known for Black business, particularly enterprise companies. If you got a B2B company that's enterprise software, we got over 25 Fortune 100 companies right there in metropolitan Atlanta. Your customers are right there. And I think, when you start look at that ecosystem of talent from our HBCUs, we've got our fair share of coding boot camps. Of course, Georgia Tech is always going to put out talent. Of course, Georgia State is going to put out talent, particularly around data scientists. So we've got a density of talent. What I'm critical about now, and I encourage everyone wherever you are respectively, is innovation density is a huge indicator of income segregation and poverty. And the reason is because when you accelerate companies very fast and you grow and they spend money and it's not translated into the people in those communities. So when gentrification comes in and you have the redevelopment of blighted areas and the tax base goes up, it drives out people who've been living in those communities for a long time. Or everything is sort of like on Uber serves. It costs more to get a shoe shine, food, everything. And what it does, folks who can't afford that because they haven't been able to get those skills. And so we're pretty bullish on this concept about equity district. And unfortunately, Atlanta is number one in income inequality. And it's because of this accelerated, we're on the path to become like a Seattle, and you've seen the reactive investments like Amazon and Microsoft, and billions of dollars they've had to invest in affordable housing. And if Atlanta isn't careful, Atlanta won't be the Black Atlanta that I grew up in and that I remember. So we've got some work to do, but I still think that even in its nascency, the density of Black-owned spaces, Black-owned entrepreneurship support programs, and Black-owned investors, we've got a density there that could be leveraged as a model. We took our OHUB playbook and we actually put it in a guide with the Federal Reserve Board and Bank on building inclusive entrepreneurship ecosystems in communities of color. And it provides a playbook on building racial equity-based ecosystems.
That's great. Yeah, and I remember you releasing that research. So that's a good resource for different cities to follow to build. In speaking to the current events, like not to to speak on what's going on, the people being outraged with and elevating the topic of systemic and institutional racism in the country. Can you talk about more of what's happening in Atlanta and at this time?
One of the incidents that I believe stand out, particularly in Atlanta and of course in Georgia, it started in recent weeks with Ahmaud Arbery down near my wife's hometown of Freeman Grove, Georgia, near Savannah, Georgia, and Hinesville, near the coast. And so that, took the nation by storm. And actually Ben Crump, attorney Ben Crump is a dear friend, fraternity brother of mine. And so we talked back and forth. And then right after that is like, you hear about this cop, with his knee on this guy's neck for 10 minutes in broad daylight, and it just adds insult to industry. We're in the middle of a pandemic and come to find out that, George Floyd was recovering from coronavirus, so it wasn't enough to have these predisposition for social determinants of health, like poverty, racism. If he was getting the proper health care, we don't know. Yep. Could that have been impacting him in any kind of way? And then, of course, he has to deal with the ugly head of racism and white supremacy. And so, of course, protests, rightfully so, broke out around the country. In Atlanta, the home of Dr. King, and where the whole concept of protest is one stage of negotiation for change and disruption. And so King and his lieutenants like Andy Young, Jesse Jackson, Hosea Williams, Ralph David Abernathy, they knew the playbook of how to run a change, whether it was the Birmingham boycotts, whether the Montgomery bus boycott as well, and other there was stages to protest. And so what's been happening of late is that we don't have the opportunity to go through the stages of protest and negotiation, rather, for change. And so this accelerated piece escalated to where the attention was on downtown Atlanta. And then you had this other looting outside of downtown and rioting that was occurring in Buckhead, which is, when people come to Atlanta, they want to run to Lenox Mall, Fifth Plaza, so they can get up on some Gucci. And, everything was sort of symbolic in terms of the type of stores and businesses that were targeted from downtown all the way up to Buckhead. And so, of course, our governor, at the request of our mayor, asked the National Guard to come in. They pleaded with people to go home, and that didn't work. And, to be candid, I mean, Dr. King was the one who said that rioting is the language of the unheard. And I think at the root of all of this, it's not just enough to tell people to go home and vote. Absolutely. I voted yesterday. Matter of fact, I didn't want to do the ballot. We stood in line, we social distanced with other Black people in Atlanta to cast our vote during this particular season. And that meant a lot. But people are hungry. 7 million Black people are unemployed, according to McKinsey and Company, because of COVID. 40 million Americans nearly as well. And so when you compound that people have been trying to figure out how to survive and how to eat and what's next for them, you've got a generation of college students that graduated into unemployment. They matriculated into debt and poverty. You got internships that were canceled. You know, we work with 5,000 students around the country at 400 schools, and we heard their cries. A lot of these students have been on the front lines of, protests. And then, of course, when the curfew was put in, I got the curfew text an hour and a half after the curfew started. So, I don't know what technology they're using and, the carrier's relationship with those technologies. But anyway, my point in all of that is there was some inefficiencies in that. But just because a curfew is instilled and you might be tired, you don't rip two human beings out of a car and destroy the vehicle and slash the tires. And so that Morehouse student and Spelman student of the two historically Black colleges and universities, along with Clark Atlanta University here in Atlanta, they were ripped out of their cars, man, and it went viral. And that created additional unrest. And so last Sunday, some of our team members that are local to Atlanta, we ended up going down. We had so much swag and merchandise that we were preparing to give out at South by Southwest. We said, we got to do something with this stuff. And so we took it down. There were people giving out water and snacks. And so it was a peaceful protest that was led by HBCU students and HBCU leaders. And that's pretty current on where things are. Seems like the protesters have, the rioting and looting seems to have been diffused, and the protests are still growing, rightfully so.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you for giving us that insight into the Atlanta region and what's going on. What just before this was I think Black VC had an event. We Won't Wait had a number of venture capitalists sharing stories of just really elevating the current situation and sharing some statistics, right, of the abysmal amount of funding that goes into founders of color, especially Black founders and Black women founders, talking about also money that goes into money that how hard it is for first-time fund managers to raise, right? You mentioned, raising as 100 Black angels and allies. Can you what beyond the protests? Protesting is, like you said, it's a step one, but in terms of speaking of action beyond that, what do you think needs to happen? What do we need to do? What change or should we be calling for?
Well, absolutely. Well, I pinned a Substack. You go look me up on Substack. I pinned an open letter to the tech ecosystem and these so-called allies about their lack of investment in Black tech ecosystem builders in particular. And that letter has gotten a lot of traction, and I've been doing a lot of media, a lot of interviews, and talking to companies, and essentially saying, I'm not interested in pilots and press releases to fund false negatives. And, we don't have the time to help you get your PhD in anti-Blackness and how to be anti-racist. Ultimately, economics is at the heart of all of this. And that is definitely one of them. That's the one I wrote about Microsoft. I encourage you to read that one as well. And I think there's another one as well, the second one there. And I encourage you to read that. And so, but I want to say something. I posted this on LinkedIn. If you go look at my post there, and I'll read it. It says, let me hip you to some game by Dale Gines at the Federal Reserve Board, OHUB and I. If you only fund the top of the tech startup and venture pyramid, you may create outlier Black wealth, but if you fund each level of the pyramid, you'll create wealth for the entire community. Now, I'm gonna put this up here real close. You may not be able to see it that clear, and we can send this out, but that's a economic ecosystem building pyramid that we created with the Federal Reserve Bank. And what it shows is our playbook of how you build an ecosystem from the ground up. At the foundation, you gotta have early exposure and socialization. The problem when it comes to tech, startup, and venture, Sergio, is there are not enough people in America, particularly in our communities. Exactly, there are not enough people there at the bottom, early exposure and socialization, that know what we talk about. When we use the word ecosystem, when we say tech company, startup, venture, LPs, we have to understand that we are participating in an outlier community in America that disproportionately is white male and white female. And so if you want to truly build an ecosystem that creates multi-generational wealth for all and shared prosperity for all of its stakeholders, you have to fund at each level of the pyramid. And so there's been a lot of conversation at the top of the pyramid with these signals in terms of 100 million and 2 million and 10 million, 20 million. I just took, before this call, I took 30 minutes to listen to Arlen Hamilton's response to one of the tweets that she had sent out. And, you know, I got a couple tears in as well, because for the last 10 years, and really it's 20 years, you know, you give people the benefit of the doubt, and you're always self-guessing your investment thesis, and your back office is not tight enough, and you miss this, and you don't have these 30 criteria. And it's BS, because I see folks who have no investing experience raise what they call $50 million small funds, $100 million small funds. We have look, we'll take what we can get, because we haven't been getting this. And I wanna be clear about that. But for all the Black people that are getting calls, including myself, take a moment, and whether you're Black, Latinx, because you know I'm gonna put this out there, there are more Black Latinx people in the world, you know, in North America in particular as well. A lot of people don't understand that intersectionality that's there. I know you understand, Sergio, but what's keen is, if you are in a position of privilege where they're calling you and asking your opinion, don't take the first offer. Same thing that we tell people when they're negotiating the job. When they come offering you the job, you're not gonna lose the job because you counter offer them. And I think that Black people and people in general must come to understand the difference between diversity and inclusion and equity. I like how my colleague and mentor, Janice Bryant Howroyd, first Black woman to build $1 billion company. I like how Janice Bryant Howroyd frames it. Diversity is getting invited to the dance. It is an invitation to the dance. Inclusion is being able to help select some of the music so that we can dance together. But equity is getting a piece of the door. You know, it's getting a piece of the royalties that the music plays. It's being transactional, if that makes sense. And I signaled this in an article I was quoted in on Mashable, I believe yesterday, and Cheryl Dorsey, another ecosystem builder and data journalist, and her data has, she's been tracking the public statements of tech companies, and now we want to know what the commitments of these tech companies are going to be. And what was signaled was, this is not the time for kumbaya moments. It's got to be transactional. Because what you believe in, you invest in. And we understand that if you believe in something, you'll be sacrificial. You know, where are you going to make a sacrifice? And so when I hear about funds that have $100 billion under management, and you establish a $100 million fund, and then have the nerve to say, this is the largest of its kind, it's sort of an insult when that is 0.1% of your assets under management. And I encourage our Black colleagues out there to understand what equity is. 13.4% of America is Black. We should be asking for at minimum 13.4% of the capital to transfer into Black fund managers, founders, and what I call family of ecosystem builders. Right now, if you got a program, and if your program budget is $1 million, ask for 10 million so that you can scale it and fund it for the next 3 to 5 years. That's how we should be thinking, and that's the type of conversations that we should be having. So go back and say, I thank you for the 100 million, but would you commit 100 million for the next 10 years? And then will you commit to racial equity training for your board and for your C-suite and for all of your employees? And would you institute an authentic diversity, equity, and inclusion solution to hire and to procure and to market across the main functions of your fund and your portfolio companies? We have an opportunity right now to shift it. But if you get in the room, and here's the problem about you being excited about being the only Negro in the room. Because when you get in the room and you don't have the input of others that have gone before you or the wisdom of those who've been doing this for a while, you negotiate beneath your privilege of being in the room. So it's important that during this season, and I also want to talk to much love to our Black employees, our brown employees, and our allies that are in these tech companies. This is the opportunity for you to go to your senior leadership and ask for the resources you need to be able to do business with our community. Because right now, it'll look real bad if they hiring Black folk because you asked for something. So you got a window of time. You got to understand when the planets align. I don't see this opportunity coming for America or the world ever again. We are in the middle of a pandemic. The economics of this world society are being reset. Industries are failing. New industries are coming on the scene. The fourth industrial revolution is here. You can see it before your eyes. And we haven't even seen the impact of COVID-19 on all of our industries yet. And so right now, while people are saying they want to help, ask for it. I'll close with this in this particular sentence in breath. We encourage founders to ask for more than they need because you don't know how long your runway is going to be, right? The same theory applies here. You got to ask for more than you believe you need. This is not the time for you to be asking for what you need. Shift your mind to one of thriving, not surviving. When you're surviving, you ask for what you need. When you're in a survival mindset, you ask for what is required for systemic change and sustained change. And that's the type of leadership. And if you don't have that courage to do that right now, call me and I'll help walk you through it so that we can get these resources to people. And I'll close with this. If you want to see change in policing, the culture of a police department is shaped by the police chief who is appointed by a mayor. That means you got to get the mayors elected that are going to appoint the police chiefs that are going to set policing. The district attorney is an elected official. Judges are elected officials. And so when you have money and resources, money answers all things. And that's why it's important for us to be having this economic conversation. And people are like, this is the distraction. No, this should be the focus. You let us focus on getting resources to the ecosystem. We'll play our part. And we got another group that's playing their part on the front lines in the streets.
Absolutely. And I think that's, I love how you dived into that because I had a conversation with a friend of mine and haven't had to, staying away from some of the crowds as a safety measure, right? We are in a pandemic. But trying to understand like what, different ways we can, still move things forward. And you don't have to be, on the street is one way. And then, making sure founders are asking for what they rightfully deserve, and also advocating for them, investing in them, all things that we can do. So that's great. Rodney, I'll thank you for diving into and giving us a little bit more of your evening. Can you share? Do you want to share any last words for the audience as they focus on how we can make the venture space and the startup space more equitable? What any words of advice?
Just want to reiterate that take the time and understand what equity is. We talk about it in my book, Kingonomics. There's a lot of content that we've produced at OHUB, and just you can search a lot of the stuff. I encourage you to do that. It's important right now that you lead with equity, racial equity. And right now, what I appreciate is that people are not just saying women and minorities, and people of color. That's why when the one fund came out, it was like for people of color. I'm like, no, we talking Black right now. You know what I mean? I love everybody, but right now we're talking Black.
Yep.
And then when we're done talking Black, which we won't be done for 400 years, but look, next year we need to focus on brown. You know what I mean? Like we got to stay on this. But this week and this month, we're talking Black. And so be unapologetically about if you're pursuing careers, ask about the racial equity at the fund. Ask about their policies for belonging, how they find their deal flow. And if you're in a position to invest in Black GPs like ours and others, and hold us accountable of making sure that money reaches into Black founders. Every Black GP is not investing in Black founders. Mm-hmm. When you look at the private equity space, and we also deserve to be in everybody else's deals as well. Sergio, you and I would have loved to have been like Jason Calacanis and got a grant for $25,000
That's right.
Put in Uber. It was a grant, no risk to him. And so, we still want to be in the top deals as well, but we want to make sure that capital gets to the community. When I'm talking to folks, I'm like, look, commit 13 to 30% of your funds under management. Because guess what? If 75% of venture-backed companies are failing, well, heck, 25% just allocate that to us and see if we do a little better.
That's right. That's right.
Just give us the failing money. So that's what I would say. Be encouraged, continue to amplify, take care of your mind space, isolate it. Don't try to stay engaged with social media all the time. Be helpful and jump in where you can, because opportunities are being created. I tell you what, if you've got some salespeople out there, some people who are willing to make calls to LPs to set up meetings, when we raise this money, who do you think we're going to come back to and say, hey, man, I need somebody to jump in and do this job? So right now, if you got some extra time on your side and you're learning venture, reach out to these Black GPs and say, how can I be helpful right now? And that's one of the ways I could tell you 100 Black angels, I need to talk to LPs. And so if we should be able to close this small $5 million fund in 60 or 90 days, I want to go back out there and do 100 million.
There we go. Right? Yep.
So why not?
Yep. I love it. I love it. So thank you, Rodney. In the time when I think a lot of people have told me, everybody's tired. It's been a long, it's intense, but hopeful, right? About the next step and excited. And I think that's important to talk about. So thank you, Rodney Sampson, everyone. This is RBL1 Live. Thanks for joining us tonight. And thank you for being our guest, Rodney.
Absolutely. Thank you.